it sometime very soon. Before we begin the presentation, we always open with a prayer. And I think Patty Kubala has a prayer for unity for us.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Patty.
Oh my God, unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal to them thy great purpose. May they follow thy commandments and abide in thy law. Help them, O God, in their endeavor and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, leave them not to themselves, but guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge and cheer their hearts by thy love. Verily, thou art their helper and their Lord. Baha'u'llah.
Thank you all again for joining us. And now I'll turn this over to Tom Kubala, who will share a little information about what Baha'is believe, and then we'll introduce our speakers. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. It's so good to see you all here. Thank you for coming. As we always do, I read this paragraph, or these two paragraphs that briefly describe the central tenets of the Baha'i faith. Throughout history, God has sent to humanity a series of divine educators known as manifestations of God, whose teachings have provided the basis for the advancement of civilization. These manifestations have included Abraham, Krishna, Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad. Baha'u'llah, the latest of these messengers, explained that the religions of the world come from the same source and are in essence successive chapters of one religion from God. Baha'is believe the crucial need facing humanity is to find a unifying vision of the future of society and of the nature and purpose of life. Such a vision unfolds in the writings of Baha'u'llah. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Nadia and Everett Ayoubzadeh. Our son Everett, as many of you know, married this delightful and wonderful woman, Nadia Ayoubzadeh. Nadia and Everett live in Minneapolis with their two children, Maya and Mateen. Everett is a full-time community volunteer serving in the neighborhood where George Floyd was killed. He supports a community pantry that serves 70 families in the neighborhood. He is committed to establishing a junior youth spiritual empowerment program in South Minneapolis and is a photographer as time allows. Nadia is a first-generation immigrant who grew up in South Minneapolis. Her family fled religious persecution as members of the Baha'i faith in Iran. She is passionate about community building and equitable healthcare and enjoys teaching spiritual empowerment classes for children. And I thought I'd include two recent photographs that Everett sent the family on the left, and then recent gatherings around George Floyd Square in South Minneapolis. And with that, Everett, you want to take it over, or take the screen from me?
Sure, thanks, Dad.
Mm-hmm.
You could probably just stop sharing for now. We'll start, and then we'll share a screen a little bit later.
All right.
Oh, so nice to see everybody. So I am the lucky one because I got to marry into this amazing family and have Tom and Patty as my parents. And so for those of you who know them, you know how lucky I am. But let me start. We thought we would start with how we landed in Minneapolis. So as you heard in the introduction, my family and I fled religious persecution as members of the Baha'i faith. And we found ourselves in South Minneapolis in the early 80s. And despite my whole reality and shifting, being as a 5.5-year-old exposed to a new language, a new culture, a new weather. I'd never seen snow when we arrived in November, and all that white stuff on the floor was frightening for me at first. Even though my older sister was delighted to play in it, I didn't know what it was, and it was a shocking experience to land into. But very quickly, we felt at home. We were in a community that was predominantly African American and immigrant. And having that community was everything to us. I quickly, having a single mom, I had all of these second moms and aunties, and there was just such a sense of love and unity and willingness to help each other, knowing that a lot of us had a lot of headwinds to overcome each day of our life. And despite the crime, and we knew that we heard gunshots at night, or there was a drug house across the street, it never was a state of fear. We felt the sense of community and the sense of being a part of one human family. And so as I grew up and my mom got her license as an RN, we started to have the means to move into a better neighborhood. We moved out into the suburbs, but I still felt that draw to the African American and immigrant friends that that culture that I was so comfortable with. And so as I grew into middle school and high school, I started to see a huge disparity where, I was hanging out with those friends over lunch and in the hallways, but in my advanced placement classes, none of them were there with me. It was mostly white in my classroom. And driving around with my friends, we would get pulled over. And so experiencing and starting to see that society treated my family, right, and my friends differently depending on who I was with, started to become really apparent. And so I personally felt this longing to want to change and to close those gaps and those disparities. And so I vividly remember standing in the lunchroom line with my friends who said, Nadia, we're so glad you're in these advanced classes. You go to college and you come back and help us find jobs. I was like, wow, you guys can come to college. I didn't quite understand. And as we went through the journey, I started to see how the systemic racism had really stacked the cards against my friends, right? Sorry. And so I ended up working as a biomedical engineer. I ended up in healthcare. And in healthcare in Minnesota we have one of the worst racial disparity gaps in our community. And it was something I was very aware of. And working in technology, you can imagine that my coworkers were white, my leaders were white, and there was very little diversity in the workforce. And so because of that, there wasn't a lot of attention or interest in looking at these issues or looking at this systemic issue that a lot of people just weren't aware of. And then COVID happened, right? COVID happened and it threw healthcare for a spin. Our whole organization started to really reel from this pandemic that had landed in South Minneapolis, and what are we going to do? And so I got to be part of a team that was helping our organization think about recovery and how we're going to financially recover from this pandemic, where we had to cancel all of our surgeries and take care of this issue in our community. And then throughout all that stress, George Floyd was killed. Direct blocks from where I grew up, blocks from where our healthcare system works and operates. And it caused the whole community to stop and pause and really wake up to the reality of these disparities that we had been living with for decades. And so this vivid picture of a Black man being killed at the hands of police so unjustly was such a wake-up call to the South Minneapolis community, who the people who were living in it were feeling that all along, but a lot of others who work in these structures and systems had not necessarily given it much thought or attention or even realized how bad it had really gotten. So with that, you know, Everett and I, we live in Minneapolis, and during those first few days, it was really a time of heartbreak, a time of, it was a very heavy time. You know, our neighborhood got together, our captain blocks, and we had to sleep with our windows open in case there were, you know, people coming in from all over the country that didn't necessarily have good intentions. And just like in Iran, when we saw our community being burnt down, there were fires and stores were closing, and a community who had already been impacted by COVID, you know, a lot of those frontline workers were from this community. They'd already lost their jobs and now had to deal with the civil unrest that came after the passing and killing of George Floyd. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Everett to kind of pick the story up from there.
So I will actually, I'll share a clip. Many of you may have seen this. Some friends at the National Baha'i Center had come to kind of get some interviews and get some footage just as a like recording this for history's sake, before our memories shifted and changed and adapted or were lost in my case. And then we discovered months later that they were using this footage from one weekend's time and interviews that took place, and they were actually putting together programs, which kind of embarrassed us to no end. But I will continue this embarrassing process by showing one of the 5 clips. So if you haven't seen it, then you can get a visual, kind of a taste, a little bit of the proximity of the Baha'i Center of Minneapolis, which was just one short block from the intersection of 30 and Chicago. And then I'll continue after that.
Let us know if you can't hear the audio.
Yeah.
The days that followed the death of George Floyd provided a summer of reimagining community. The intersection that memorializes George Floyd remained closed to vehicle traffic throughout the summer.
What has happened over time was a daily kind of meetup on the street every day at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. twice a day. And there's particular neighbors that became kind of organizers and went around and contacted the organizations and the businesses and the neighbors in the immediate few blocks and created these spaces. The main thrust right now is for everyone to just make sure that every one of the neighbors has a face-to-face interaction, so we know who the neighbors are. We start to begin to know what it is that they're thinking about. What do they feel about this new reality? What are their hopes? What are their fears and concerns? So yeah, it just kind of fluctuates between this bigger movement, bigger picture, global symbol, to it's just about getting to know the neighbors.
A transformative energy permeated the community. With neighbors serving together every day, relationships began to solidify. Many began reimagining a community together, even when tensions arise.
So my family immigrated. We came to Minnesota as refugees in the early 80s after the revolution in Iran. And my family lived blocks from where we are sitting today. There was a lot of crime in the neighborhood, and so that really brought people together. And it's so funny, even though there was so much happening in our neighborhood, I always felt safe because there was a lot of second and third and fourth moms that I could go to and families that I could approach who would take me in and keep me safe. So one of the incredible people that we've met through this experience is Eliza.
I got Eliza behind me, crushing it on parking lot security.
I've been here since May 28th, so I think it's around about 52 days, 54 days. I've been in Minneapolis for 30 years. This is home. You know, I left Mississippi, so this is my home now. Minnesota has been a great place for me to be at, established for my two girls and stuff to stay.
Eliza's helping me on intake. Hey.
It's about community, and that's what I'm about. I came from a community about community, and Minnesota has offered that same to me here.
Eliza engaged neighborhood youth and worked to redirect their energies to play a positive role in the neighborhood.
Jesus, he walked among the peoples. He didn't stand the walls. He went in the bars. He went in the highways and the byways. And that's what good Jesus did. So that's what my desire, to be on the highways and the byways. The peoples need to see the peoples outside doing stuff, helping them. You know, see what I can help you up. When you down, let me pick you up. If you need some food, let me bring some food to your house. We are the church. Let me get that correct. We are the church.
And her ability to connect with the youth in this community, because she was in the streets, she lived their life, and she knows the words, and she knows the experience, and can connect at a level that a lot of Baha'is in this community may not know how to connect at that level. And so just being friends with Eliza, and through her meeting the youth, I can see great opportunities for us to engage the youth of this community, to take the forefront of the efforts in building that oneness and bringing about change.
The Baha'i Center welcomed me in. Once they got to know me, you know, we just like family here. You know, like I told them when I came in and got to know with them, I told them, you know, we family now. Y'all can't get rid of me and I can't get rid of y'all, you know. So when God could connect you with a divine order with someone, you know, it's just like home. You know, ain't no, you meet your new family. It's God's family.
Racism is a profound deviation from the standard of true morality. It must be supplanted by the establishment of just relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions of society that will uplift all and will not designate anyone as other. The change required is not merely social and economic, but above all, moral and spiritual. Written by the Universal House of Justice, the Global Governing Council of the Baha'i Faith, in a letter to the United States dated July 22nd, 2020.
All right. So that's just the third segment of 5 kind of short video that were put together. So you can find more context there. But I think what I really wanted to emphasize was the aspect that started with these meet on the street spaces. So from early June, this consistent regular pattern of 8 in the morning at 8 at night, which then as fall came on, it got dark really quick. So we shifted it to 7 p.m. And this space continues to this day. And there's people that are coming together 2 times every day. I mean, it's
every day, 40 below, they still meet.
And it takes place under the awning of the previous Speedway, which I think 7-Eleven was buying on a national level, and it's in process, but they've kind of left the Speedway, and they thankfully took all the fuel and fumes out, because we have a fireplace right between the pumps. But that it happens every single day, twice a day. I was going to both for much of the summer, and then as the kids got into distance learning in the fall, and it just became easier and possible for me just to kind of stick with the mornings. And there's a somewhat of a distinct group, and there's just been these wide spectrum of folks that are coming to these various meetings. It's a very diverse part of the city. It's not necessarily, there's one of the 4 neighborhoods that intersect was historically Black, but even at its peak, it really wasn't that a majority Black kind of neighborhood. So, but there's 4 neighborhoods that intersection connects. And Minneapolis is one of these realities where it's very much like block by block by block. And so you have pockets, and you have this kind of crazy kind of segregation where it's like real specific. But there was this wide spectrum of folks. Generally, you do have a gentrification force that's, as more and more kind of professionals are moving back into, you're getting a lot more white and a lot more wealth kind of coming in and pushing out poorer communities. So that's just a general reality that is one of the major tensions that is specific to this neighborhood. You also have kind of a street organization that's operated on that intersection for 30 years and has ties with some of the kind of businesses and owners of some of the businesses on there. And so that influence exists, and it's there, and it's a reality. It's a place that wasn't always a place you wanted to kind of walk at night. And so there's a saying that one of these Black women that have kind of really taken the lead at facilitating these spaces, she's an English teacher. She has master's degrees in literature, and she is very familiar with Shakespeare. She's originally from Arkansas. She was a Marine. She has a very unique experience that it is so precisely applicable to a lot of the dynamics that come up, having 23 years of high school teaching. But one of the sayings that she has is the corner has been gentrified by history in the same way that this gentrification process is also a factor. And this has led to tension for the economy and underground economy that existed. So the function of this space, it's so powerful, and yet it's so simple. And yet, I mean, it's simple as an idea. It's very,
Profound.
very challenging to carry out the act of talking. and realizing that, if we come together in person, we can better understand what's actually happening in our surroundings. We can come together and draw on each other's strengths. But there's been nothing about these meetings that has been easy. And so there was an early kind of organizer just by default. She was a white woman, but she understands organizing and networking. So she went around and kind of single-handedly got a lot of the business owners and church leaders in the vicinity to try to come together to these spaces. She ended up, even late in the summer, it became a tension that here she was a white woman and this space was kind of connected to Julia. So her read of the situation, she just backed away and kind of said, no, it's the space that's important. Don't let me become a barrier. And so one of the primary kind of learnings that's been happening is just understanding whiteness and understanding how whiteness gets carried into all of the spaces. and so there's been kind of these mantras that have emerged from this time. And I had just kind of written it out. So here's a sense of what has kind of emerged from these day in, day out, twice a day meetings. 4 assumptions, and actually there's kind of officially a 5th one has solidified. It's assume everyone has COVID, so act accordingly, mask up and back up. Assume everyone is armed, it pays to be patient and polite, act accordingly. Assume that everything is being recorded. If you don't want someone to see it or hear it, don't say it or do it. If you do want to say something, say it with your whole chest. And then the 4th assumption is assume that not everyone in the square or even everyone in the circle has your idea of liberation in mind. Act accordingly. The 5th assumption that has kind of emerged is everyone here is crazy. And the way Marcia describes it is like, you have to be a little bit crazy to think you can take on like this, such a systemic thing, but we're choosing to do so anyways. So then those are kind of the assumptions, but some of the mottos and principles that have kind of emerged are, this is stolen land. So we recognize that where we are is Dakota land. And there's, Minneapolis is one of the largest kind of urban populations of native peoples in a city outside of a reservation. And so not only is it stolen land from the past, but there's a sizable native community living in Minneapolis. This principle that Black lives do matter, and that if the liberation of Black folks doesn't happen, the liberation of, it's the liberation of us all comes through this. If we can understand this and see this, and we can see that Black lives do matter, then we can all advance together. So we are, the square is many things at once. So it's a neighborhood, it's a community, and for many folks there, it's a protest zone. And this has always been a particularly interesting part for me to play in as a Baha'i in this space, where I'm trying through my actions, not necessarily trying to be in a stance of protest, but in a stance of constructive agency, constructive resilience, that we're building community. And so I've always kind of, there are people there that see it as a place of protest, but at the same time, it is a neighborhood, and we're striving to build community through this. We're a community that strives to listen to slave descendant Black women. And it's a very kind of particular motto that we've come to just understand through experience the wisdom of this. And what Marcia says is, we've tried it every other way. And let's give this a shot. And it's really incredible. Just, I think, 2 days ago, after the verdict, and we were in this place of like jubilant kind of celebration, as a square, as a community, and like international press. I'm sure you all probably saw some footage of the square, but it was just like a circus of press. And so these morning meetings became like on a whole nother level, where Marcia, as a school teacher, who often, the morning meetings tend to be majority white, maybe 75% white folks. Evenings, it's a different matter, and the dynamics shift and change. But Marcia kind of had this opportunity to kind of call out all of these concepts and principles that have really kind of solidified as a community that we've come to understand for a lot of the new folks that were there. And in the process, the woman that you met or that you saw in this video, Eliza, she was, as a teenager, as a 13-year-old woman, she had incredible power in a street gang. And this is her experience. She later, found a calling, became a pastor, and strives to live in that mode. But like where she kind of is rooted is in the street, and she has this ability because of that to connect and to understand and share with folks that don't have that experience the other dynamics that are at play that are invisible to most of us. So the way she operates in this meeting is like sometimes very strong, and a little bit, she gets kind of in preacher mode, and sometimes it is a cause of tension in itself. She's only about 4 years older than Marcia, but Marcia, the other morning, where Eliza came in and she was hot and she was heavy and she was like, kind of like calling out hypocrisy that she was seeing in some of the kind of forces of the community. And after kind of ruffling some feathers and kind of working through it and having a lot of tears and expressing kind of a lot of grief, Marcia was able to talk about this principle of listening to slave descendant Black women, and how she strives to model it. Even though Eliza is only 4 years older, she will provide that space and always kind of have this mode of hearing and listening to this voice, while encouraging everyone's voice to be there. But I think that's probably what's been one of the most profound impacts on my experience, is to have the opportunity to have all of these various folks with different experiences in a space working through these things that I think anywhere else that I've seen tensions that get anywhere close to that, it just ends. There's nothing further. And so to see the depth of complexity and the depth, the wide spectrum of experience that's coming together and striving to work through it has just been kind of mind-blowing. And basically I've just arrived, I've gotten to the point where I used to be the guy with the trash picker upper and the bucket, and then I would like sit on my bucket, and then I saw this need to like make a fire, and I was there pretty consistently in the morning, so I would start the fire. And then the woman who worked in a coffee shop had to back out because of COVID concerns and vulnerabilities in her family, and so then I kind of picked up taking the coffee where I could. But it's basically just been showing up and listening like this entire time. And it's only it's only kind of as spring has arrived and the warmth that we're beginning to even offer kind of the junior youth spiritual empowerment program and some of the community building activities that the Baha'i community around the world has experienced. It's you know, like 10 months later that we're beginning to even just kind of offer. And I feel like that it's just been kind of a gut decision, but I feel like vindicated in the depth of relationships that have resulted. So sorry, it's hard for me to like not just like fire hose it on everybody. It's just like so much experience day in, day out that I oftentimes end up only processing it in a space like this. So my apologies, but maybe we can leave some time for questions.
Everett, I was just trying to send you a message about time, but I don't want you to stop. So I'm having a challenge with that myself. Thank you both so very much for this. This is really, you're having an amazing experience and you're able to share it with us so well. We are going to open up for questions and discussion right now. So Tom, I don't know if you can see everybody. I cannot, so I won't be calling on people. If you want to just maybe raise your hand literally in front of the screen so Tom can see you if you want to speak up about something, or Everett can see you and call on you. Ask what you will or say what you will.
Kathy Ayer and then Robert Maloof.
First of all, that was just a lovely presentation, and it was just so clear, and I love the enthusiasm and the information both. So I have a question. The friends are getting together twice. Are they also meeting in each other's yards in small groups and continuing the conversation, number one? And number two, does the city have some way of supporting this and being involved? And number three, I assume you live in one of those four communities. And are those four communities, neighborhoods right around that intersection, are they essentially the same?
The four neighborhoods, are they the same?
Yeah, pretty much. Are they the same?
No, it's very diverse. Yeah. So Central is like primarily Hispanic. It's still, yeah, that's like the highest concentration of Hispanic in the four areas. Powderhorn has like one of the highest concentrations of lesbian households. So that's just a part of the Powderhorn. The reality of the Powderhorn neighborhood is like that has become the gay and lesbian community is a strong and a vibrant presence of Minneapolis, but that neighborhood is specifically like a high concentration of lesbian couples. Then you have Bancroft, which is primarily white and more affluent. Bryant is the historically, it had the highest concentration of African American in South Minneapolis. The way that the segregation that has worked in Minnesota has primarily, like Milwaukee, the north side, it's similar to Milwaukee's degree of segregation in that way of concentration. So North Minneapolis is the highest concentration of African American community, but we're pretty close to the it's not technically a reservation, but there's a Little Earth is a kind of a community. It's a corporation, but it's kind of like a native community that's in the Phillips neighborhood, which is very close. So there are several questions. We live in the neighborhood next to Central. Central neighborhood was where Prince grew up. there is a kind of a Black business district that goes through Bryant and Central. There's like a corridor, and there was a high school that Prince went to that was, you know, so but it's, again, it's very block by block. It's very kind of yeah.
And then do you talk to people in the neighborhood all the time, all day long? There's multiple chat groups that, you know, they talk online, and I need help. One of the things that Everett didn't mention are the community dinners, which have been phenomenal, where some of the chefs in the neighborhood get together. There's like half a dozen of them, and then people donate. I mean, we had a big pizza party one night, a potluck, and so it's just this big festival. The kids are doing double dutch. We tried to do an ice rink that didn't quite work for the kids, and definitely a sense of community. And then when there are tensions or when there are challenges, there's a group of African-American men that are called Agape that are trained in de-escalation. And so really that sense of community support and community regulating itself from working through tensions or issues has been really, really rather effective. There's groups that do the security at night, community members. So it's a pretty vibrant and dynamic square that, you know, some days are full of visitors. One of the things that Everett and I helped to support was these sanitization stations at each of the entrances, where there's people handing out masks, handing out information about the square, and sanitizing people's hands because we're still in a pandemic. And so I don't know if that helps kind of give the vibe of that particular square, and friendships that continue and conversations that continue throughout the day.
In terms of, I'll try to be quick, in terms of the connection to the city, the Agape movement is funded by the city, and it's through their kind of Office of Violence Prevention that is one of these initiatives of striving to think about it. It can lend to further tension. Just having the presence, there's been this dynamic of the narrative that is kind of in all the media about the square, and the lack of safety and the lack of access for EMS and fire. But there's kind of been this strength of community built to ensure that. So yeah, there has been this tension of the city wanting to open the streets back up to traffic, and there were, you know. Go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, you know, I just wanted to thank both you and Nadia for doing this. It's really been amazing, really mind-opening, and I just really think it's wonderful what you're participating in. I used to live in Oakland, California, and now that was a city that was really divided. You know, I lived in an all Chinese neighborhood, and then there was an all Black neighborhood, and it was a rough city, you know, at that time. It's improved, but I think I want to move to Minneapolis.
Well, thank you.
That's right.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question for Everett or Nadia? Michelle and Dan. Yes, I see the hand in the dark there.
Hi, Everett. Hi, Nadia.
Hey,
Could you talk a little bit about your food pantry, what that project is like?
Sure. So initially, because of the location, it was just a matter of proximity and people wanting to bring stuff to the community, and then hitting the barrier and getting stuck in traffic.
Because of the pandemic, and what I was trying to say is a lot of that community member had lost their jobs, right? So it was already a bad situation. When the George Floyd was killed, a lot of the stores were burnt down. The Target was gone, the Walgreens was gone. And so families didn't have transport, the buses stopped, so they didn't have transportation. There were no stores to go buy diapers. There were no places to go buy groceries. And so it became apparent that that community was really suffering because of what was happening. And so people started bringing donations because everyone was so appalled at the killing of George Floyd. People wanted to have something to do. And one thing that they could do was to go and buy a bunch of diapers and baby food and dog food and whatever, and bring it to that community. And there was nowhere for them to take it. So the road kind of ends right at the Baha'i Center, and then it's the square. And so people just started bringing things to the Baha'i Center.
Yeah. And there had been a family who had come and set up a card table, a Baha'i family that saw all these like people just flocking to the square to give their offerings, to kind of
pay their respects.
And so they had some granola bars and water, and they started handing out granola bars and water. And then the next day there were a few more tables, a few more families. And then like 4 days later, we had 40 volunteers, and people were bringing truckloads upon truckloads of supplies. So they saw us out there and they said, oh, we can drop stuff off there. And so then we were just trying to, as quickly as we can, distribute what was coming in. So in the process, we've developed a partnership with a Baha'i inspired nonprofit called Organic Oneness. And they emerged in Chicago doing a lot of community building activities. Their board,
social action.
Yeah, a lot of social action. And there happened to be one of the board members who was back because of the pandemic back in Minnesota. She hadn't been here for 20 years. It was just one of these situations where like her sister was like, yeah, my sister, they just formed a nonprofit. Maybe she could help you talk through what that might look like. And then like 4 days later, we were a program of Organic Oneness. And so our like learning curve of connecting to social action and striving to kind of build this and become aware of that world kind of allowed. What was happening is we were receiving a lot of cash donations, like in the donations, and the Baha'i community cannot accept funds from folks who aren't Baha'is. There's like humanitarian funds that can be, but we weren't kind of set up to know that. Mm-hmm. And so we were asking these questions, and this kind of allowed for that to continue. So 10 months later, we just completed a grant that included funds that this other neighbor, Mike, who on his own spends 60 to 70 hours a week befriending primarily Black kids, junior youth, and teenagers from like 9 to 17. And he spends all of this time every week since George Floyd was killed, because he saw them not going to their distance learning and wanting to do something about it. And so we ended up discovering him through Eliza. And as they were trying to find funding for him so he wouldn't have to do it all out of his pocket, they learned that we were interested in trying to get the junior youth program going. And Mike himself saw the beauty of working together, and he wanted to utilize the Baha'i Center as a location for all of these activities that he's already doing. So Organic Oneness as a nonprofit has really allowed us to kind of think about how do we take this kind of charity model food pantry that kind of landed in our lap towards a more kind of like, how do we work together with community to build community? And so that's what they're really about. They even hesitated taking us on as a project because of kind of what a typical food pantry is like, and not really aligning with them working together with community. So that's just a little bit. There's a lot we could share kind of about that. And we're really excited looking into the summer as vaccinations are approaching, and the the strength of relationships are at like a family level.
Yes, Mina.
Thank you very much, Nadia and Everett. It was wonderful experience that you shared with us. You know, after George Floyd's murder, events and news that were broadcasted on the news media were all showing looting, firing stores, people attacking each others. So news were very bad. I mean, nothing was good coming out of Minnesota. What you are sharing with us is almost 180 degrees opposite to what I am hearing, I used to hear, even today, we are hearing. So why on earth news media are not even tiny little bit interested about wonderful programs that the community in that four corner, in that square has? They don't show this stuff to people to see, to show them that people are able to come together. They're able to work together despite the racial differences, financial differences, where they're coming from. Why we don't see that? They're not interested to come to you, or you have to go to them. I don't know why they are not showing this good stuff, which is, I bet it is not just in Minnesota, it is everywhere, that people are working together, but somehow we don't see that. Why is that?
I think that's the question right there. Part of my education in these months is really seeing this play out on a level, because the day-to-day meetings allowed primarily as a what actually happened, what is the reality. And so we were able to ask these questions and clarify and understand the context in which things were happening. So in one way, you could say that in the area of George Floyd Square, and this is how the police will describe it, and this is how the city has described it when it suited their agenda, is that you have had 1,300 incidences of gunshots. And they have the technology to show this and to show, okay, they have this shot spotter technology that can triangulate, where the shot was taken from. And so if you look at it one way, and I have many friends who heard this and were convinced by this to the point where they would not come anywhere near it.
And we're scared for us.
And yet what we came to understand is that because the economy of the only way that these friends that found themselves on the street because of the systemic racism that allowed them no other path, and either had already become felons for being targeted for drug convictions and this kind of thing, left them very little choice to be kind of making on ends meet in an illicit kind of sale of narcotics. That whole economy was disturbed. And so in one sense, they wanted things to go back to normal. But the city also wanted things to go back to normal. And like, I am not a conspiracy theory minded person. I really have very little patience for some of that, but I came to see, because I was there day in, day out, and then I saw video footage that confirmed things where people would come in a big white Suburban, step out of the vehicle, unload a clip into the air, get into their vehicle and drive off. And it was only because Ring cameras on people's homes had it captured, and then there was a connection to each other, that we were able to kind of see how these forces work together when it suits their agenda. And so the forces are strong and deep, and it usually is related to power and even just a lack of vision, because this is how things have gone. And so one of the 24 demands that the community came together when they were asked, the city council wanted to open the street, and the community responded, "We want justice." And they said, "Well, what does justice look like?" And so in the matter of 24 hours, 3 women went around to all the people in the square, all the business owners, all the fellas, all the neighbors, and what does justice look like to you? And so in these 24 demands was kind of looking at the history of the impact of racism on this neighborhood. And one of these was to have the trial in Minneapolis. And because of the strength of the relationship formed, there was a time as the trial approached that the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, was calling Marcia almost daily. And the city council members were calling on a regular basis. The governor's people were interacting, because a lot of the demands were on different levels of government. And so so much of what Black community has known for their entire existence in this country, but because of the way in which kind of whiteness operates and the way in which kind of white supremacy operates, is that we can't even get to the point where we can accept as what they've been saying for so long, even if it's not entirely true. It has so much truth based in it. So all that to say, I mean, because of Darnella Frazier, who is a student of Marcia's, and her mom reached out to Marcia that night after George Floyd was killed to ask what to do with this footage that her 17-year-old daughter had. If you look at what the police reported on what the situation was, it would have never gotten to the surface had it not been for Darnella Frazier. And so there's an aspect of like being able to see truth that is just starting to open up. So yeah, it's a deep question. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of forces, and there's a lot of forces that aren't necessarily conscious, but they just kind of continue to perpetuate how things operate. So yeah, it was a pretty hopeful day on Tuesday to kind of see things played out. But yeah, you can find positive stories. Minnesota Public Radio did a whole series that kind of identified some of the various voices and people within the square. But yeah.
Dolores.
No, thank you so much for this. I've learned so much, and it's given me so much hope. And if you already gave these statistics, bear with me. I'm 78. I'm forgetful. Approximately, when you talk about the square or that area, about how many people live in that area and what is the physical measurement, or whatever you would call it, blocks of that area that you're talking about.
So Minneapolis in general is not a very densely populated city. There's a lot of kind of single family homes that are the majority of these 4 blocks, with the exception of like transportation corridors that have some, fourplexes and 8-unit and maybe 12-unit kind of structures. So the density is relatively low when comparing to like Chicago, for example. But that part of South Minneapolis is is one of the most diverse parts of the city. And so there's a diversity index map that you can see. You can visualize diversity. And so you can see the segregation in kind of around the lakes and around the outskirts is where it's primarily all white. The north side of Minneapolis is primarily African-American. The south side is very diverse. So you have numbers in the diversity index, which is like you pick 2 people from random from whatever unit you're looking at, and the chance that they come from different backgrounds, anywhere from 0 to 100. So we live in a neighborhood that's probably in the 30s, and just in this neighborhood right around the Baha'i Center, it's like in the 80s and 90s in terms of diversity.
And we're just one neighborhood over.
Yeah.
So it is really block by block. And George Floyd Square is a 4 blocks? 4 blocks, 2 blocks, 2 block square.
Kind of what I was wondering. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions before we call it an evening? Yeah, Dick.
Dick's hand.
Dick Smith and Colette. Hi, how are you?
Hi, good to hear you. And thanks for the story. My question is, what's next?
Beautiful question. Yeah. So the community, there is, like Nadia mentioned, we kind of discovered what Signal was. It's this encrypted chat service like WhatsApp. And so there's probably about 20 different Signal chats based on different emphasis. So there's a qualified immunity chat where there's a group of friends trying to come up with legislation that deals with qualified immunity, that deals with insurance and how police cannot be sued, and that it being covered by taxpayers. And so there's a lot of groups kind of working on different things within the square. What's really thrilling is kind of this partnership that we're just beginning to develop with this neighbor, Mike. Mike, in the meantime, has kind of created this vibrant pocket in the Powderhorn neighborhood area, just a couple blocks away from the Baha'i Center, where that neighborhood is getting together regularly. One of the projects he did with the kids was tap like 30 maple trees and then reduce the maple syrup, and then had this big French toast kind of festival, and where the kids were doing a lot of the work, and then they were doing the making the French toast, and then they ended up selling it late. They made a bunch more and sold it, and so those types of spaces are happening like multiple times a week with just Mike on his own. And so he has a vision of using the parking lot and the grounds of the Baha'i Center to kind of expand that and build a team around him. So that's what we're really excited to. We're kind of on a mission as Baha'is to use this model that was it was a narrative in Harkesh Nagar in India, just outside of Delhi, where they had this really focused, intensive effort to find youth who wanted to become mentors and animators of junior youth. And they did it so intensively that they were able to kind of register 50 youth at once to do it, to go through the process together. So we're striving to follow that model as closely as we can. And we're trying to, I've been using, it wasn't even me that brought it up, but I thought it, and then somebody else voiced it. But like this Avengers Assemble is like happening, where all of these folks that had like previously lived in Minneapolis and helped in kind of efforts of gaining capacity in the Junior Youth program have happened to like decide to move back and buy homes in Minneapolis. And so there's all these folks with experience and capacity and connections to Minneapolis, like converging and moving back. So yeah, that's kind of what we're looking for. we're hoping to really strengthen the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program to have like at least five groups that can start working together and having this cohort of youth be the resources that kind of help in the process.
And one of the things I will share is that didn't just happen like we're gonna start a program for youth. It was really a need expressed by the community. What do we do with our youth? Our youth have been through so much trauma. Our youth have lost so many opportunities because of the systemic racism and all of the structures. I talked about healthcare in the beginning, right? We have huge disparities just in healthcare. And we have like in the whole country, there's only 2% of our doctors are Black. You know, it's really, the systemic racism is so great. And so this desire for the community to do something for the youth, and the Baha'is having this model of community building that revolves around youth who are arising to become mentors and really helping to empower this next generation. And so that's really the conversations that are happening right now is, do you know of anyone that has a need for food? And if so, who are they and how can we connect them to the pantry? Would you like to help us with the pantry? We do deliveries to those who are homebound because of the pandemic or for whatever reason. So community members can get pulled into that. And by the way, would you be interested, or do you know of anyone who wants to mentor youth? Because we want to help support empowerment of this next generation. And so it's a very natural conversation, and everybody knows, well, especially Everett, because he's there every day. There's this trust that's been built that he's part of that community. And, you know, I grew up in the community, the Baha'i Center, I worship there, I work there, you know, and so we have those bonds and connections. So that's what's next. It's really continuing to build community in a neighborhood that has so much love and, you know, energy.
I hate to say this.
We're over time, and we were told to stop at 8.
No.
Sorry, Mom, Dad.
You took exactly the amount of time that was appropriate for you to take, and we loved it. So we thank you so much. We hope that we've given all of you some food for thought. There are so many lessons learned here that are for all of us. You know, no matter where we live, we need to think about how we can identify the needs of our own communities and how we can apply the lessons that are being learned here and that they're sharing to solve our local needs, and to understand the importance and the methods for building true relationships within our own neighborhoods and communities. We don't need to wait for a flashpoint. We can do that now. And so we hope that everyone will have some takeaways and think about, you know, where they are and what they're doing and who they're doing it with. Our next talk is coming up on May 14th. Stephen Moy will be sharing some thoughts on the impact of social media. And then on May 28th, Dan Conlon is going to be giving a talk on becoming your true self. And meanwhile, if you have any interest in learning more about the Baha'i faith, or perhaps joining a study group or a devotional gathering, creating a junior youth empowerment group in this area, you should certainly feel free to contact any of the Baha'is that you know, or specifically you could contact Patty Kubala at the phone number that's shown there on the screen, 617-5475, or you could call me, Nancy Hintertier, at 262-573-2144. Or if you just want to look into the Baha'i faith itself, you can ask any Baha'i, or we're pretty transparent and available, or you can go to our national website, which is also shown there on the screen. We thank you so very much for joining us tonight. This has been just a rich gathering, and we're very, very happy to have you all with us tonight. Thank you again. And we'll see you next time. I don't know if anybody wants to hang out and chat, but I'm not sure whether anybody's ready to do that, but we're done. Good night.
Wonderful to see you all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Everett, Nadia. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Paul and Kit.
Much love, much love. Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Love you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, you guys. This was wonderful.
So good to see you guys.
Good job, Tom and Patty.
So happy to have you here.
Yeah, very proud.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Hang in there,
doesn't
everybody.
get much better.
No. Exactly.
Thank you, Nancy.
This was beautifully done.
Thank you,
My
everyone.
pleasure.
Nadia and Everett, nice job.
Oh my gosh.
Goodness.
Very lovely.
Over now, you guys.
Hey, Everett? Everett?
Yes.
This is Susan Watt. I'm the one that offered you the
Hey, Susan.
the coolers.
Yeah, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. I'm trying to figure out what to do with them, and you gave me an idea, which is to try to get in touch with some of the food pantries in Milwaukee and see if they could use them.
I'm sure they could.
Are they the right size, or are they too small? They hold about a 6-pack.
Yeah. I don't know. For us, it would be a little small for what we've been,
Okay.
using.
What you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. Right. That's kind of what I wondered. So maybe I'll just pitch them out. I get them with medication in them. They send me eye drops every 90 days. That's how I wind up with them. So, okay. Well, thank you. I enjoyed tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Susan.
You bet. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Everett and Nadia, it's Mom.
Hey.
I just noticed I got a text here from Linda Weber, who couldn't be here tonight, but she sends her love to you.
Aw,
Anyway,
please give
she has
her
she has another meeting she had to go to.
No, let's leave them. They can leave too.
Please give her a love. It's been so long.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello, Afife.
Darwin.
There you are.
Hey.
Say hi, you guys.
Thank you for inviting me to join.
You bet. Good to see you, Afife.
Ethan is here. Ethan.
Oh,
hi.
Hello.
Hello, Apa.
Oh, aloha. Good to see you all. Oh my gosh.
Oh, man. That's
Dar-
a treat.
Darwin, where are you these days? Are you down in South America?
I'm back in the great city of Milwaukee.
Hey.
So yeah, are you guys ever come down this way?
It's been a while, but
They kind of have their hands full.
I can't pull him away from the square.
Understandable.
Wow.
Ethan and Nagar and the kids were in the square the other day and ended up like in conversation with the lead caretaker, Janelle Austin, and George Floyd's aunt and cousin, who were who were kind of in town.
They're like, what brings you here? They're like, we're George Floyd family. Oh!
We're just having a good conversation. That's awesome. Oh my gosh. Making history over there. It's intense.
It's definitely
It's
taking
intense.
place. Yeah, it's definitely intense. I mean, there's on these like signal chats that I like, some I just totally ignore now because they've kind of come like taken on a whole nother thing. But sometimes there'll be like 700 messages in the last 12 hours. You know,
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. I just want to say, I can't thank you enough. I have learned so much. I had no idea. You can never have time to tell us what's going on.
I didn't have time to process it.
Yeah. So I'm glad we recorded this so that we'll send the link out if people want to relook at it or who couldn't be here. A lot of people couldn't be here who wanted to. So anyway, thank you
Thank
so
you for
much.
creating such a beautiful
Yeah.
space.
Yes.
Wonderful series that we haven't even